They came singing. That is the detail I have never been able to set aside, no matter how many years have passed since the morning. Not the fold flash at the outer marker, not the 61 vessels sliding into our system in their staggered holy formation like a fleet from an older century, not even the numbers when the Accord response fleet finally showed itself. What I cannot forget is the singing. A transmission on every open channel, unencrypted, unhurried, broadcast toward our sun as if they owned its light. A low, cycling harmonic in 11 layered registers. The Varenthi Covenant's sacred arrival hymn, the song they sang, according to their own scripture, whenever they returned to a world of their children. I heard it through the observation gallery speakers at Vethrin Kale Station at 03:07 hours on the 15th day of the 4th month of the Accord year, 44,910. I was 67 years old. I had retired from the watch 11 months prior after a career that had spanned 4 decades of orbital monitoring, 2 deep space postings, and 1 tour aboard the fast-response warship Calith's Measure during the Theron Corridor patrol years. I was living at the station because my daughter had offered me her spare room in the residential quarter, and because the view from Vethrin Kale's observation gallery, 14 kilometers above the Kerith Plateau, above the weather, above the thin brown haze of the lowland cities, looking out at stars that were sharp and cold and infinite, was the finest view I had ever found for the kind of thinking a retired man does when sleep no longer comes easily. I was doing that kind of thinking when the priority amber alert woke the station. Vethrin Kale is not a military installation. It is a shield generation platform, one of 37 in the planetary atmospheric processing tier, strung across the high latitudes like a necklace of engineered mountains, each one a node in the Accord Global Shielding Network. The array's function is to maintain the photonic deflection barriers that protect the planet's upper atmosphere from stellar flux events and the particular energetic chaos that comes with having a warship fleet operating in low orbit. In wartime, it becomes something else. The network can refocus those barriers downward, turning the entire planetary shield into a layered active defense architecture. But the operators at Vethrin Kale were engineers and technicians, not soldiers. When the Amber Alert sounded, they followed their protocols. Secure the array, lock the barrier nodes to Accord network control, and contact the Frontier Watch for instructions. My daughter Selah was one of those engineers. She was 39 years old, the station's chief structural array officer, and she had spent her entire adult career managing the geometry of Vethrin Kale's 17 primary generator pylons. When the alert woke us both, she was at her console inside of 4 minutes, running integrity checks on pylon 11, which had been running warm for the previous week. She had not looked out the gallery window. I had been watching the stars when the fold flash registered a clean, hard pulse of displaced light at the outer marker. Where the Kerith approach corridor passes the Covenant detection threshold we had mapped 9,000 years prior. The flash was not singular. It repeated. Then again. Then, in a pattern I recognized from the briefing documents I had reviewed once a year, every year, for the last 2 decades of my career, because every officer in the Accord Frontier Watch reviewed those documents annually and signed the acknowledgement form and understood what the pattern meant. 61 vessels, in tiered formation. Their bow geometry unmistakable. Then the singing started. I stood at the gallery window and listened to 11 registers of sacred harmonic fill the speakers. And I will tell you what I felt in that moment, because I have told this to my grandchildren, and I want the account to be precise. I did not feel fear. I am not certain fear was the correct response. What I felt was something closer to the particular weight a soldier feels when a thing they have prepared for across their entire professional life finally arrives. And the preparation either holds or it doesn't. And there is nothing more to do now but observe. A kind of readiness that has aged into something quieter than readiness. A held stillness. I had signed those acknowledgement forms for 22 years. I knew what was in them. 9,000 years before that morning, The Accord Archival Authority's Deep Signal Analysis Division had intercepted and decoded a set of navigational transmissions in the outer system. The transmissions were old, recorded by a network of long-duration signal buoys the Accord had deployed in the Kareth Approach Corridor 30,000 years before that. During the early post-consolidation era, when the Accord was still cataloging every anomalous signal that had ever passed through inter-system space, most of what those buoys recorded was stellar noise. Some of it was historical fragments of the very transmissions that had accompanied the original Covenant survey fleet when it passed through this system. 37,000 years before the morning I am describing, assessed Earth, classified humanity as a species of promising but incomplete development, and logged the planet as a Covenant seed world pending return. The Deep Signal Analysis Division spent 400 years working on those recordings. They produced, at the end of those 4 centuries, a document that was classified at the highest level of the Accord Council of Record and distributed to fewer than 200 individuals in the entire Accord system. It was called the Kareth Covenant Signal Assessment. It was 112 pages long. It contained a complete structural analysis of the Varenthi Covenant's navigation hymn series, their approach formation protocols, their communication encoding, and most critically, a full translation of their theological claim on Earth. The Covenant believed they had seeded this world. They believed the beings who now lived on it were their spiritual children, their genetic legacy, their wards in the great architectured garden of the galaxy. They believed that when they returned, those children would receive them as parents returning home. The document's summary section, authored by the Analysis Division's senior linguist, Areth Devan, read as follows, and I have memorized it, because it was read aloud to every class of watch officers in their final assessment year, and because I read it myself a dozen times before I signed my annual form and understood, each time, what it meant. The Covenant does not regard their return as an invasion. They do not regard it as a reclamation in the political sense. They regard it as a homecoming. They are certain we will be diminished, grateful, and eager to be folded back into their care. Their certainty is absolute. It is theological. It cannot be reached by military demonstration alone, because a military demonstration will be interpreted as the fearful thrashing of abandoned children who do not yet understand that their parents have come home. The correct response is a document one that speaks to them in their own theological register, that cites their own scripture against their own claim, and that is certified by a body of record they cannot dismiss as provincial. The Accord Council of Record must stand behind it. The refutation must be prepared before they arrive. It cannot be improvised in the moment of contact. That document was delivered to the Accord Council of Record's Special Commission on Covenant Response in the 406th year after the signal assessment. The commission convened. They read it. They understood it. And they did what the Accord does. When it understands something with a 9,000-year lead time, they began work. The Accord refutation of Covenant claim took 8,612 years to complete. I want to give that number its weight. Not because it is large, there are numbers in the Accord archives that make it look modest, but because of what it represents. 8,612 years of sustained, deliberate, generational, institutional work, passed from one commission to the next, each cohort spending their professional lives contributing to a document they would never see completed, in service of an argument they would never themselves deliver. Theologians who spent 60 years learning the Covenant's ritual language from the intercepted recordings, so that the refutation would speak to the Covenant in a register they could not dismiss. Archivists who spent decades tracing the Covenant's own scriptural tradition backward through the signal fragments, identifying the internal contradictions in their claim on Earth that their own sacred texts contained. Legal scholars who constructed the Accord's counterclaim in parallel, not just that humanity rejected the Covenant's authority, but that under the Covenant's own juridical traditions, their claim on a world that had developed independently for 37,000 years was null from the moment of that independent development. The final document was 4,387,000 pages long. It existed in full copies on 7 distributed archive nodes, and in condensed operational form, 12,000 pages aboard every Accord, capital warship, and every orbital defense platform. Every Accord ambassador who had ever served had read the 12,000-page version. Every watch officer, every frontier scout. I had read it when I was 26 years old, in the first month of my watch training. I had found it. I will be honest, overwhelming. Not because of its length. Because of what it said, plainly, across those millions of pages. We know you are coming. We know what you believe. We have prepared the answer. Come and read it. This is the thing I mean when I say humanity was ready. Not the warships, though the warships were there. Not the orbital ring, though the orbital ring was running at full active status. Ready in the way that a prepared argument is ready. In the way that a certified legal record filed 40 years before the case goes to trial is ready. In the way that knowledge carried across 9,000 years and shaped into a document is ready. The covenant would come singing. We had spent 9,000 years learning their song. We had found where their scripture broke against itself. We had written the answer in a language they could hear. The singing was still playing through the gallery speakers when my former aide, a young signals technician named Kareth Hale, who had transferred to Vethrin Kale the previous year to be closer to his family in the Kareth lowland cities, knocked on my door. I should explain about Kareth. He was 41 years old. He had served under me for 9 years during my last posting at the Kaleth Orbital Watch Station, and in that time, he had been, I am not given to easy praise, and so I offer this, deliberately, the best signals officer I had ever worked with. His ear for transmission pattern, his ability to read the substructure of an encoding before the analysis software had finished its first pass, the particular quality of stillness he brought to a console during a contact event. These things were not common. He had transferred to Vethrin Kale 18 months prior, when his wife had been offered a position at the Karath Plateau Atmospheric Research Institute. And 2 years from now, in the year he turned 43, he would have been eligible for retirement with full-grade honors. He would have returned to the lowland cities with his wife and their 2 children, and presumably found something quiet to do with his days, the way good signals officers do when the work is finally done. He knocked on my door at 0311 and said, with the particular flat efficiency that characterized everything he did, "Commander, outer marker contact confirmed. 61 vessels. Covenant Formation Standard." "I know," I said. "Accord Response Fleet has acknowledged activation. They are in position." He paused. "They have been in position for 12 days. I nodded. This too was in the briefing documents. The Accord Response Fleet, assigned to the Karath Approach Corridor, had been staging in the deep shadow of the Kale Deep asteroid cluster, a loose aggregate of carbonite and silicate rock, 300 kilometers in diameter, sitting 800,000 kilometers from Vethrin Kale, at the edge of the inner system detection threshold, for 14 days. 441 warships, including 7 capital-class vessels, including the Times Accord's Enduring Memory, which was the largest warship humanity had ever built, 1.7 kilometers from bow to stern, and which had been named for the thing this day was built on. "The refutation is loaded?" I asked. Transmitted the moment the fold flash registered. Full document, Covenant standard encoding, on all channels they have ever historically used for theological exchange. He checked something on his tablet, 12 seconds after contact confirmation. "Good," I said. I meant it. We went to the observation gallery. Selah was there, along with 3 of her pylon technicians and the station's duty communications officer, a quiet woman in her 50s, named Kareth Olin, who had been running the overnight signals shift and had stayed past the end of it because she could not bring herself to leave. They were all at the gallery window. Through that window, if you knew where to look, and we all knew, Because we had been looking at the Kareth approach corridor from this window, or windows like it our entire professional lives, you could see a faint cluster of light that was not stars. 61 ships in holy formation, 93 million kilometers out, and closing at a rate that would bring them to the inner marker in 4 hours and 11 minutes. The hymn was still playing. I listened to it for a long time. I had heard recordings of it in training. The real thing, broadcast toward us from 93 million kilometers away at full transmission power, was different. Not louder, the speakers normalized it, but denser. The 11 registers had a texture to them that the recordings had never quite captured. It was a sound that had been designed for its function. It was a sound intended to call children home. It was warm in the way that a thing becomes warm when it has been in use for tens of thousands of years, worn smooth by repetition, made familiar by all the other worlds that had heard it and responded to it as intended. I do not know how to describe the precise wrongness of hearing it aimed at us. The assumption baked into every harmonic that we would be lesser, that we would be grateful, that we would open our arms to a parent we had never known and never needed. I found it, in the end, sad. Not frightening. Sad in the way that the particular certainty of the very old can be sad, when that certainty has become indistinguishable from blindness. At 0419 hours, the Covenant formation crossed the inner marker. Their formation tightened the outer escort vessels, closing toward the primary column, a standard Covenant approach protocol that our analysts had cataloged from historical observation data. Their transmission patterns shifted. The hymn did not stop, but a secondary channel opened. On that channel, the voice of the High Consecrator. I had read the briefing on the High Consecrator of the Varenthi Covenant Reclamation Host. His designation, translated from the Covenant's theological register into a chord standard, was something close to Time's first speaker of the returning. He was the highest ecclesiastical authority aboard the fleet. It was his function, by Covenant tradition, to make the first contact with the children of a seed world, to announce the return, to receive the gratitude of the returned to. His voice, when it came, was low and resonant. The encoding was the same 11-register harmonic of the hymn. Our translators had been running live analysis since the fold flash, and the real-time translation appeared in text on the gallery's secondary display board, scrolling quietly in the amber light. People of the seated world, it read. Your long waiting is ended. We are the Varenthi Covenant. We are the ones who gave this world its first breath of directed life. We are the gardeners who shaped your earliest ancestors and blessed this soil and promised to return. We have returned. You are known to us. You have always been known to us. Come forward and receive the renewal of the sacred bond that has always existed between maker and made. The gallery was very quiet. My daughter had stopped working on her pylon logs. Kareth stood slightly behind me, his tablet lowered, watching the translation scroll. I waited. At 0431 hours, the Accord diplomatic transmission system broadcast Earth's response on the same channel and all adjacent ones. Not a voice. The refutation was not delivered as a voice. It was delivered as a document 4,387,000 pages, transmitted in full at maximum bandwidth, preceded by a single-sentence cover transmission in Covenant standard encoding. The Accord of Earth acknowledges your arrival. Please review the enclosed record before proceeding. The cover transmission was one of those things that becomes legendary in retrospect. At the time, it was simply the product of 8,500 years of institutional judgment about what tone was appropriate. Not hostile, not performative. The tone of a people who had done their work and were not particularly interested in drama. The Covenant fleet decelerated. This was not expected. Their approach protocols, as catalogued, called for a continuous advance to the secondary marker at reduced speed, with the presumption that the seed world's population would have assembled some form of welcome formation by then. They were not supposed to stop. They stopped. Their formation held, but the advance ceased. At 0447 hours, the secondary channel went quiet. The hymn continued, but the High Consecrator's channel closed. At 0502 hours it reopened. This document, the High Consecrator's voice said, is not a welcome. The Accord's response, already prepared. It is not. It is a record. Silence again. Longer this time. In the gallery, nobody spoke. I watched the stars. Kareth had moved to stand beside me, and I was aware of him at the edge of my peripheral vision, his characteristic stillness, the way he held his tablet with both hands flat across its surface when he was not actively using it, a habit I had noticed in his first week under my command, and associated ever after with the quality of his attention. At 0611 hours, the High Consecrator's channel opened again. What he said, translated in real time onto the display board, was this: "You have read our scripture." Yes. The Accord's response read, "We have read it carefully. We have read it for 9,000 years. You cite the 13th canon against us. We cite the 13th canon, the 42nd canon, the full body of the Renewal Doctrine commentary from the Covenant's own 6th era, and the specific passage in the Consecration of Worlds texts that defines the termination condition for a seeded world's covenant relationship. Under your own scripture, a world that develops sovereignty independently for more than 30,000 years is released from the seeding bond. This world has been sovereign for 37,000 years. We have been sovereign for 37,000 years. Your scripture says you cannot claim us. We are simply pointing at what your scripture says. The gallery window had begun to lighten at the edges. Dawn at 14 kilometers comes faster than at the surface, without the haze to soften it, and the Karath plateau below us was still dark. But the eastern horizon carried a faint distinction between the black of the plateau and the deep blue of the approaching day. I remember thinking, very briefly, that the light was fine, that this was a fine place to watch what happened next. The High Consecrator did not respond for 31 minutes. During those 31 minutes, I watched Karath review something on his tablet, delete it, write something else, delete that too. He was monitoring the Covenant fleet's internal transmission patterns, a passive intercept capability the Accord's deep signal network had maintained across the entire approach corridor for the last 14 days, recording everything. He did not tell me what he was seeing. He did not need to. I had trained him, and I knew the habits of his attention, and when his hands went very flat against the tablet and very still, it meant he was reading something that required all of him. At 0642 hours, the High Consecrator's channel opened. The translation began scrolling. "You have had 9,000 years to prepare this argument," he said. "We have had 9,000 years in fold transit. We did not know. We could not have known. We know." The Accord's response read, "We are sorry for the asymmetry. We did not choose it. The asymmetry is not the point," the High Consecrator said. "The point is that you have made the argument, and you have made it correctly. And I am reading, now, the passage in the 13th canon that you cite, and I am reading it in its full context, which I know as well as any living consecrator knows it, which is to say completely, and you are right." A pause. "The canon reads as you say it reads. A world that achieves 30,000 years of independent sovereignty is released from the seeding bond. We did not return before that threshold. We are now outside it. The claim is not valid under our own law." The gallery had gone entirely still. Even the technicians who had wandered in and out during the long hours of exchange had stopped moving. My daughter had turned from her console and was watching the display board with an expression I recognized, the expression of someone who is watching a very old and very heavy thing come to rest, after having watched it move for a very long time. At 0649 hours, Karath said, quietly, beside me, "Commander." I looked at him. He was showing me his tablet. One vessel had broken formation. It was a Lance-class strike vessel, the Covenant equivalent of a fast attack ship, smaller than the escort cruisers, built for speed and for the delivery of a single overwhelming strike at a specific target. It had separated from the main formation at 0.633 during the high consecrator's silence, and had been decelerating in a specific vector. Kareth had been watching it for the last 16 minutes. He had not told me because he had needed to be certain of the vector before he spoke. It was aimed at Vethrin Kale. I will say this plainly. I did not know, in that moment, whether the High Consecrator had ordered it or whether it was acting independently. I do not know that now. The vessel's command log was never recovered, because the vessel was destroyed 11 minutes and 40 seconds after I saw its vector on Kareth's tablet, by 2 rounds from the Times Accord's enduring memory, secondary battery, which had been tracking it since it broke formation. But before it was destroyed, at a range of 4,000 kilometers, it fired once. The Covenant Lance ship's weapon was something our analysts had classified as a directed thermal lance, a focused beam of extreme temperature-charged particles designed to be used against planetary surface infrastructure, not warships. Against a warship, it would have done moderate damage. Against a high-altitude atmospheric processing platform built to civilian engineering tolerances, it did exactly what it was designed to do. The beam struck the secondary observation ring, the outer arc of the station's monitoring and signals infrastructure, a structure 260 meters long and roughly 40 meters across at its widest point, housing the passive deep signal intercept arrays and 11 signals technician stations. The ring was not a pressurized compartment. The technicians inside it worked in full atmosphere suits as a standard safety protocol. None of that mattered. The thermal lance vaporized the ring and everything in it in approximately 3 seconds. 11 people, 9 signals technicians, 1 structural survey engineer from Sayla's team who had been running a routine pylon junction inspection along the ring's attachment point, and 1 signals specialist who had been in the ring since 0400 because he had asked to monitor the deep signal intercept arrays directly rather than through the relay feeds. Kareth Hale. The Times Accord's enduring memory times destroyed the Lance ship 14 seconds after the impact. The Accord response fleet, which had already emerged from the Kale Deep shadow over the preceding 2 hours 441 warships, now visible in the Kareth approach corridor, in full formation, their running lights off, their weapons systems at active status, made no further offensive movement. The Covenant fleet, which had detected the emergence of the response fleet and had been watching it for those 2 hours, in what I can only describe as a sustained state of theological shock, did not move. The Lance ship was gone. The main formation held position. Those 11 minutes and 40 seconds are the ones I return to most often, in the years since. I have spent a good deal of time with them. I know what I did and what I thought and what I said, in approximately the order I did and thought and said it. The first 30 seconds, Kareth had shown me the vector. I had confirmed it. I had gone to the communication console nearest to me and reported the Lance ship's vector to the Accord Response Fleet's operational command on the priority channel. The response came back in 43 seconds. Acknowledged. Response Fleet has tracking. Do not attempt evasion maneuvers. Vethrin Kale's pylon array must remain on axis for network integrity. We are managing this. Managing this. That is the language of a fleet that has a solution and is in the process of implementing it, and I knew what the solution was. The Times Accord's enduring memory times had been tracking the Lance ship from the moment it broke formation. What I did not know, what I could not know standing at the gallery window, was whether the fleet's solution would arrive before the Lance ship's weapon did. 11 minutes and 40 seconds is not very long. It is long enough to do a number of things. I told my daughter to take her pylon technicians to the station's interior, away from the gallery windows. She told me she was not going anywhere. We did not have time for the argument, and she knew that, and I accepted it, and she stayed. I sent a brief communication to the signals team on the primary intercept console, instructing them to flag any change in the Covenant fleet's main formation behavior. Specifically, any other vessel that showed an irregular vector. I did not want to be managing the Lance ship and miss a second one moving elsewhere. The signals team confirmed. No secondary movement was observed. Kareth remained beside me, monitoring his tablet. At approximately 4 minutes before impact, he said, "Their internal transmissions changed. The Lance ship's channel isolated from the fleet network 3 minutes after it broke formation. It made its decision independently, or it received a private order and then isolated to prevent countermand." He paused. "I cannot determine which. Does it matter?" He considered this. "For the record," he said, "yes. For right now, no." That was him exactly. That was 9 years of working beside him, in a single exchange. I watched the approach corridor. The Covenant fleet's main formation remained stationary, distant, a cluster of lights that had not moved. The High Consecrator's channel remained closed. I could not know what was happening on the Covenant's flagship in those minutes, whether the High Consecrator knew about the Lance ship's movement, whether he had ordered it stopped, whether he had ordered it sent. I could not know, and so I put the question aside and watched the corridor, because the corridor was what I could manage. At 6 minutes, I said to Kareth, "Go inside." "No," he said. "Kareth, the intercept arrays in the secondary ring give me a faster read than the relay feeds," he said. "If the fleet moves, I will know 6 seconds sooner from here than from the interior console. 6 seconds may matter." It was operationally correct. He was not wrong. I did not argue. I was standing at the gallery window when the beam hit. The ring was on the station's far side. I did not see it. I heard the impact, a sound I am unable to describe adequately, because it was not the kind of sound that translates. A deep structural shudder that moved through the station's frame and into the floor, and through my feet, and up through my chest, and I saw the secondary alarm cascade across the gallery's display board. And I knew before the board had finished updating what the secondary observation ring's status column meant when it went dark. I did not move for approximately 10 seconds. I do not know what I looked like. My daughter tells me I looked the way I had looked once, years before, when she was a small child and I had received the notification that a close friend from my early posting years had died in a training accident. A particular stillness that is not the same as calm. She was across the gallery by the time I moved and had her hand on my arm. "Dad," she said. "The array," I said. "The pylons. 11 is holding. All 17 are holding." She paused. Kareth was in the secondary ring. "I know." I went to the console nearest to me and reviewed the damage report. The secondary ring was gone. The station's primary structural integrity was uncompromised. The array pylons were at full operational status. Vethrin Kale's shield generation capacity was unaffected. The station had been built for durability, and the durability had held. This is the kind of thing that engineers know about their work, and that soldiers know about the things built to protect them, and it is never quite the right thing to think about in the seconds after 11 people die. But it is what you think about when you have spent 40 years learning to operate inside the moment rather than inside the grief, because the grief comes later, and the operation has to run now. At 0703 hours, the High Consecrator's channel opened again. "What was done," he said, "was done without my order. I want this stated in whatever record you are keeping." The Accord's response: "It is recorded. The record will reflect your statement." The Lance ship's commanding officer was of the Covenant's Second Reclamation Order. They held the theological position that the children of a seed world, however long gone, could not revoke a sacred bond by legal argument. They acted on that position without authority. "We understand. I do not ask for your forgiveness," the High Consecrator said. "I ask for the continuation of the legal proceeding. I want the refutation received into the Covenant's Council of Record through formal channels. I want this done correctly. We agree to that." Silence. Then, "I am going to read your document. The full document. It will take time." "We have time," the Accord's response read. "We have been waiting for 9,000 years. We can wait a little longer." The High Consecrator's channel closed. The hymn, which had continued playing throughout, finally stopped. The Covenant fleet held position. The Accord Response Fleet held position. Vethran Kale's array held position. The sun came up over the Karath Plateau. I want to describe what that looks like from 14 kilometers. It is a thing I have never stopped finding extraordinary. In all the time I lived and worked at altitude, the plateau below is still dark. The highland basalt is black and absolute in the pre-dawn, and the eastern sky goes from black to deep blue to a particular shade of pale silver green that I have never seen reproduced accurately in any painting or photograph. Then the sun comes over the eastern escarpment, and the plateau catches it in a long horizontal sweep of light, and for approximately 40 seconds, the world below is half dark and half gold, divided cleanly, and the haze that hangs in the lowland valleys lights up amber. And if there are warships in high orbit, and on the morning of the 15th day of the 4th month of the Accord year, 44,910, there were 441 of them, plus 7 capital vessels, plus the times Accord's enduring memory times their hulls catch the light in clean flashes against the dark of space, and the whole of it together is a sight that is, if you are inclined to the word, beautiful. I watched it. I let myself watch it. Selah stood beside me, close enough that her shoulder was against mine. Neither of us spoke for a while. After a time she said, "He would have liked this view." "He knew the view," I said. "He'd been up here 18 months. He never said much about it. He never said much about anything," I said. That was his quality. It was true. In 9 years under my command, Karath Hale had been the most economical speaker I had encountered in uniform. He said what was necessary. He said nothing else. He had asked to monitor the deep signal interceptor rays directly rather than through the relay feeds on the morning that 61 holy ships came singing into the Karath approach corridor, because he believed direct monitoring gave him a faster read on transmission substructure during an active contact event, and he was right about that, and he had gone to the secondary ring at 0400 to do his job correctly, and he had been doing his job correctly when the thermal lance came. There are things you carry. I am not going to tell you otherwise. The High Consecrator read the refutation for 11 hours and 19 minutes. During that time, the Covenant fleet's internal communications, still being captured by our passive intercept network, showed a pattern of sustained and widening discussion across the fleet's senior ecclesiastical hierarchy. Karath's former colleagues, the signals team on the primary intercept console, gave me a running summary every 40 minutes. I sat in the gallery and listened to it. What they described was, as nearly as our translation algorithms could render it, a fleet of 61 ships discovering one senior consecrator at a time, that the scripture they had carried across 37,000 years contained within it the exact mechanism of their own defeat, not their military defeat. They had understood that prospect from the moment the Times Accord's enduring memory times emerged from shadow, the defeat of their certainty. The thing they had come singing toward, the children waiting to be gathered home, had spent 9 millennia doing nothing but reading the Covenant's own holy books until they found the chapter and verse that freed them. I thought about what that must have felt like. I had no animus toward them. I want to be precise about this. I had lost 11 people on the secondary ring, including a man who had served me well across 9 years, and who had been, by any honest reckoning, irreplaceable in the way that the best people are always irreplaceable, which is to say, completely. I was not without grief, but the grief and the anger were separate compartments, and the grief did not require me to want something bad for the Covenant. They had come here with a belief. The belief had found its limit. That is a hard thing, regardless of how it is brought about. The 11 hours the High Consecrator spent reading were probably the hardest 11 hours of his theological life, and I am not able to feel contempt for a person doing that work, even when those 11 hours were being spent on a refutation that would send him home without what he came for. I ate lunch in the gallery. The station's duty cook had prepared something warm and ordinary, a grain and legume dish from the Kareth lowland tradition, something that had been on every station menu in the plateau communities since I was a child, and I ate it slowly, watching the Covenant fleet hold its position in the approach corridor, and the Accord response fleet hold its position between us, and the slow movement of the planet below through the gallery's lower windows, the cloud systems dragging their shadow patterns across the plateau, and the highland basalt going through its daily color changes as the light shifted, ochre to amber, to a flat gray-brown in the afternoon overcast. The signals team gave me their 1,400 hours summary. The discussion on the Covenant flagship had moved from the High Consecrator's primary council to the wider body of senior consecrators across the fleet. 37 vessels had now opened internal theological channels. The nature of the discussion, as best the translators could render it, was something like, "We did not read our own canon carefully enough. We carried the assumption that the seeding bond was permanent. The assumption was not in the canon. The assumption was in the tradition. The canon says something different. There is a particular kind of institutional reckoning that happens when a very old organization discovers that its tradition has drifted from its founding text, and the discovery arrives at the worst possible moment, in front of an audience that has read the text more carefully than the organization had." The signal summaries described something that sounded like that reckoning, scaled up to 61 vessels, and tens of thousands of theocratic military personnel, conducted in the 11 register harmonics of a language that our translators were rendering imperfectly under time pressure. I do not pretend to have had complete insight into what the Covenant was experiencing, but I had some. At 1,600 hours, I went briefly to the memorial room the station had opened for the 11 dead. It was a small room, adjacent to the station's medical bay, with a row of 12 temporary memorial frames along one wall, one frame empty, because we did not yet know who the 12th person was going to be in the station's collective loss. Whether it was the engineer's partner, the child, the colleague. The technicians and engineers who had wandered in and out of the gallery throughout the day had left small things: a folded piece of cloth, a handwritten note, a smooth riverstone that someone had carried up from the plateau. In front of Kareth's frame, which carried his station ID photograph and his years of service, someone had left a single charged relay chip, the kind used in passive intercept arrays balanced on its edge. I recognized it as something from his work. Someone who had known his work had thought of the right thing to leave. I stood there for 5 minutes. Then I went back to the gallery. At 1,823 hours, the High Consecrator's channel opened. "The document has been reviewed," he said. "The Covenant's Council of Ecclesiastical Law, convened aboard the primary flagship, has reached an initial finding. We are listening." The Accord of Earth's citation of the 13th canon, read in full context and cross-referenced against the 6th Era commentary and the Consecration of Worlds texts, is accurate. The 37,000-year threshold has been passed. The seeding bond is terminated under covenant law. This world's sovereignty is not subject to covenant authority. The Accord of Earth acknowledges the finding, the response read. This finding will be entered into the Accord Council of Record and transmitted to all Accord member systems. The Covenant Reclamation Host will withdraw to the outer marker, the High Consecrator said. We will transmit a formal withdrawal declaration through the Accord's diplomatic channel. We request safe passage to the fold point. Safe passage is granted. There is one other matter, the High Consecrator said. A pause. The action taken by the lance ship of the Second Reclamation Order is a violation of Covenant law. The commanding officer is dead, but the order exists, and it will be held accountable on our return. I am stating this now because I want your record to contain it. Whatever your people's assessment of us, whatever judgment your history makes of this return, I want it recorded that the action was not mine and that it will not go unanswered. The Accord's response came after a pause that I think, having watched the Accord's diplomatic staff work for 40 years, was deliberate, not hesitation, consideration. The record will reflect everything you have said, it read, including that. We are sorry for your loss as well. The commanding officer of the Lance ship was one of yours, and they died badly. We do not take satisfaction in that. I had not expected that. I should have, but I had not. No, the High Consecrator said. They died badly. Thank you for saying so. The channel closed. At 1,901 hours, the Covenant Reclamation Host began its withdrawal to the outer marker. 60 vessels, one Lance ship, fewer than had arrived in the same holy formation they had maintained since the Fold Flash, moving now in the direction they had come from. The Times Accords enduring memory times, and the rest of the response fleet held position and watched them go. Nobody fired. There was nothing to fire at. The hymn did not start again. I stayed in the gallery until the cluster of lights that was the Covenant fleet had faded below the threshold of visibility. The sun had long since set over the plateau, and the sky outside the gallery window was back to black and stars. Below, the Karath Plateau was lit in the scattered amber of 10,000 settlements. Cities, townships, research stations, the long, straight lights of the magnetic transit lines crossing the highland from east to west. I had grown up on the plateau. I had spent 40 years protecting it from the sky. I would spend, I imagined, standing there with no particular purpose and a heaviness in my chest that I had no intention of pretending away whatever years remained to me at this station or one like it, watching the sky above it, because there was nothing else I was built for. 11 people were dead. One of them had been a good signals officer and a better man, 2 years from the retirement he had earned. I did not know yet, standing in the gallery, whether his wife knew. I did not know how to begin the accounting of what that meant, in the context of what the day had achieved. I am not certain there is an accounting. Some costs sit outside the ledger. The formal casualty notification for the 11 personnel of the secondary observation ring was delivered by the station commander at 2,200 hours that night. The memorial service was held 11 days later in the station's main assembly hall, attended by 412 station staff and several hundred others who had traveled up from the plateau communities by atmospheric transport. I read the names because the station commander asked me to, because I had served with some of those names, and because it is the thing that is asked of the oldest soldier in the room. I read 11 names. I gave each one the full count rank, years of service, the posting, or the work. When I reached Kareth Hale, I read his name and said, 9 years under my command. The finest signals officer I worked with in 40 years of service. 2 years from retirement with full-grade honors. Then I was quiet for a moment, because the room deserved the silence. Then I read the next name. There is an entry in the Accord Diplomatic Archive for the contact event of the 15th day of the 4th month of Accord year, 44,910. The entry runs to 43 pages. It records the Covenant's arrival, the refutation's transmission, the withdrawal declaration, and all relevant communications. It records the destruction of the Lance ship and the destruction of Vethran Kael's secondary observation ring. It records the names of the 11 dead. The final line of the Accord's official record of the event reads as follows. The Accord of Earth notes that the Varenthi Covenant Reclamation Host arrived with a theological claim 37,000 years old, and departed with that claim, formally invalidated under their own scripture. The Accord further notes that this outcome was the result of 9,000 years of institutional preparation, and that this preparation was the work of every generation of Accord scholars, archivists, and legal counsel who contributed to the Accord refutation of Covenant claim across that period. Their names are recorded in the refutation's authorship index. There are 341,812 of them. I have read that index. I spent several months of the year after the contact event reading it. It is organized chronologically, by generation, beginning with the senior linguist, Areth Devan, of the Deep Signal Analysis Division, who first proposed the refutation 400 years after the signal assessment, and running forward through every scholar, every archivist, every legal mind who contributed a chapter, an analysis, a cross-reference, a translation note. Most of them lived and died without knowing whether the work would ever be used. Most of them never met the person who had written the chapter before theirs, or the person who would write the chapter after. They contributed to a document being assembled across centuries for an event that might never come or might come after they were long past caring. 341,812 names. The covenant came singing, certain that we were lesser, certain that we were grateful, certain that we had been waiting for them the way abandoned children wait for a parent. They had 37,000 years of certainty behind them, and the full weight of their scripture, and the 61 holy vessels of their reclamation host. We had 9,000 years of preparation. We had a document. We had the names of 341,812 people who had spent their lives on it, and we had been waiting. Not the way children wait, the way people wait, who know exactly what is coming, who have read the scripture that the approaching force believes in, who have found the verse that ends the argument before it has fully started, and who have had the long, patient discipline to set that verse down in a document, certify it before a council of record, and transmit it in the first 12 seconds of contact, before a single weapon was raised. That is what the waiting was. That is what the readiness was. That is what we were.